Feels just like home. So who's ready to join me on a trip to Mars? It'll be difficult. It'll be dangerous. Well, I knew I came to the right place, the land of the Vikings. I knew I'd find a lot of great explorers here. First, a little disclaimer. I'll be sharing with you my personal insights and views and maybe a few secrets, but I'm speaking as myself, not as a representative of NASA. So let's start on our journey. I'm going to start with a little story of a meeting I had with the chief executive officer of an $18 billion a year organization. I was taking him in to show him the Mars Pathfinder spacecraft. I took him into a large room, a special clean room where we assemble spacecraft. And as we walked across the floor, he stopped me, looked me right in the eye and said, "Brian, I want you to take risk, but do not fail." Pretty much my reaction. So what could I say? I said, "Yes, sir." What should I have done? Well, I could have gone back and polished up my resume, but I actually stopped and thought about it, and it came to me pretty quickly what the answer to that riddle was. And every great explorer, from Amundsen and Hillary to great entrepreneurs like Carl Benz and Steve Jobs, and everybody in this room knows the answer to that riddle. The answer to taking risk and not failing is innovation. It's being creative about what you do and how you do it. So, why would the administrator of NASA, a notoriously risk-adverse organization, feel the need to take risk? Well, let's take a look at some data. This is the cost of a set of missions from the very first mission to fly by Mars to our most current mission, the Mars Science Laboratory, which will arrive at Mars in just in 2 months. You look at the cost of these missions, and you can see a trend. That trend was the missions were getting more expensive and less frequent. One guy at NASA headquarters took a look at this trend. He looked at the NASA budget going the other way, picked up the phone. "Houston, we have a problem." Well, we had a problem, and he had a solution for it. And what he did, he came out to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where I work, with a bold idea, something he called the Discovery Program. He said, "I want to do missions faster. I want to do them in 3 years, not 5 years, and some even 10 years. I want to do them cheaper. I want to do a mission for $150 million. And so far, so good, we said. And then he said, "And I want you to land on Mars." We said, this sounds impossible, And we, of course, thought about it for another nanosecond, and we said, absolutely, where do we sign up? This was the beginning of the era of what we called faster, better, cheaper. And what it was fundamentally about was disruptive innovation. Look at what happened after Mars Pathfinder. Look at the set of missions that we accomplished for a tiny fraction of what the missions were above us. Now, buried in that is a failure which changed the risk posture of the agency. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But again, what Pathfinder was about was disruptive innovation. We set out with a set of objectives that we could put on one page. First thing, demonstrate a low-cost, reliable way to land payload, science on Mars. The second was really about culture change. They wanted us to demonstrate to ourselves, to NASA, to the government, to the president, that we were serious about low-cost planetary exploration, that we were going to change the way we were doing business. We were going to do, for the very first time, a mobile robot on the surface of another planet. And of course, we were going to do some great science. We carried along a small set of science instruments, the first mobile geologist on the surface of another planet. This was the vision. This was our vision. This was a picture I had of an artist in Houston paint, and it shows the Pathfinder lander with its camera, with its antenna talking to Earth, and its meteorology station, and Sojourner driving off into the near distance. What we were thinking about from the very beginning was what the system must look like and how it must perform on the surface of Mars. We were thinking end-to-end performance from the very beginning. Now, as we got ready to launch, as we prepared to launch in 1996, we had a chance to reflect on the situation that we were facing. Of the 30 missions that had been attempted up to that point, only 8 had been successful. And just a few months before we launched, or would launch, The Russians attempted their most recent launch to Mars, at that time, and it failed. It never even got out of low Earth orbit. So not only did this look impossible, but the odds looked to be stacked against us. So let's begin our journey into how we actually accomplished this mission. This is our famous rover, Sojourner. She weighs about 12 kilograms. She's about the size of a microwave oven. Some significant innovations were necessary to make Sojourner successful. The first was her mobility system. She has a six-wheel system that was designed to traverse terrain that we did not know about. We knew very little about the terrain we would be facing on Mars. Another major innovation for her was how we would operate, how we would drive. And what we called it CARD, Computer-Aided Remote Driving. This is a case where we take a picture on the surface of Mars, we send it back to Earth, the controllers on the Earth bring it up on their screens in stereo, they figure out where they want the rover to go, we send commands back up to the rover, and the rover executes. All of that was very innovative at the time and continues to be the way we operate these rovers on the surface of Mars. Here's Sojourner's twin sister, Marie Curie, there with their first progeny, one of the Spirit and Opportunity engineering models, and our next rover, the Mars Science Laboratory that we call Curiosity. Look at the evolution in the capability of these vehicles. From Sojourner, who carried just one single instrument, who could go up and touch a rock and tell us the elemental composition, we decided, and I was part of the team that came up with this initial concept, let's take all the stuff on the lander, put it on the back of the rover, and now we can do real exploration. And so we took that, we did that, we put some new instruments on it, and we designed that system to operate for 3 months. We'd only designed Pathfinder to operate, or Sojourner to operate for just 1 week. Sojourner operated for 3 months. Spirit, or Opportunity now, is operated for 8 years. Instead of exploring meters, hundreds of meters, she's been exploring kilometers. One of the most significant innovations in Opportunity and Spirit was the addition of a robotic arm that we could reach out and touch and interact with the rock and the soil of Mars. Now we've taken those innovations and taken it up a major new notch with Curiosity. Curiosity weighs almost a metric ton. She carries a whole new science package. She's a mobile biochemist. Spirit and Opportunity and Pathfinder were mobile geologists. We now carry the instrumentation to go out, grab samples, to actually drill samples out of materials, put them into our science instruments, and understand the chemistry and potentially the biochemistry of Mars. This is a family, an evolution in innovation that has been pioneered at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. This is a single-board computer. It's the heart of the Pathfinder system. It's the brain of the Pathfinder. It's the brain of both the Mars exploration rovers. And at the time, it was the most sophisticated computer to have flown in deep space. It was the first modern computer to actually fly in deep space based on modern commercial technology, on an IBM R6000 computer. The reason, though, this was just one of 25 technologies that we had to invent or reinvent in just 3 years to make Pathfinder possible. And that is a daunting task. That almost defines impossible, that amount of technology work. And I got a lot of pressure. Why are you pushing this technology? Why not use existing electronics? And the major reason for that was, from my view, mitigating risk in another technology that I was even more afraid of, and that was software. Anybody know anything about software in this room? Well, I love my software team, but I don't trust them any further than I can throw them. Estimate of number of lines of code, 30,000. Number of lines of code needed, 150,000. A factor of 5 overrun in the cost of the software would have killed the project. It would have been canceled. But the presence of this machine and all the systems around it, the test equipment and all the debug tools and whatnot, allowed a very, very skilled software team to develop that much software within the budget that I had available to them. So the ability of technology sometimes to mitigate risk is something you need to be thinking about. So let's talk about risk for a second. when you're in the innovation business, you're dealing with risk all the time. Risk is you need to be able to identify it, you need to be able to communicate it, and then you need to be able to mitigate it. Decide what you're going to mitigate. So NASA's developed this very simple mechanism to communicate amongst ourselves what we mean when we talk about risk. So there's consequences, from 1 being benign, 5 catastrophic. And there's likelihood from very low probability to almost certain. We will not launch a spacecraft when we have risks up in that right-hand corner, in that red corner where that 1 is. We're going to do everything we can to mitigate those risks, and we're going to try to push them down into the green, where the risks are low. They're managed and relatively low risk where the 3 is. But inevitably, with absolute certainty, we will always have risks in that where that 2 is. Mission catastrophic risk for which we've pushed the risk as low as we possibly can. And the key there is that we understand what those risks are and that we communicate them so that when we're ready to push the button or we're ready to land on Mars, we're able to tell our customer, this is the risks we're taking, the risks you need to know about. When talk about risk, this is where it is. This is where our journey to Mars gets really dangerous. This is what's called entry, descent, and landing. It's also called the 6 minutes of terror. Because during this 6 minutes, there are, in the case of Mars Pathfinder, there are 42 things that had to work exactly as we designed them, exactly when we designed them. 42 things that had to work precisely. Now, I work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL. Some people think that stands for just plain lucky. Well, you don't get lucky 42 times in a row. And Spirit and Opportunity have done the same thing again, and Curiosity is going to have its own set of these. The key here is a very careful design, precision testing, and a very, very well planned design. So, entry, descent, and landing is something we're going to get a chance to see up close and personal in just a few seconds. These are our airbags. These airbags were designed for a 100-kilometer-an-hour head-on collision with the surface of Mars. This was a very disruptive innovation. This was really changing the game. Everything up to that point had been done with propulsion. Propulsion is expensive, and it's dangerous, it's risky. The airbag was a whole new way of doing business, and it was absolutely critical to our success. Nobody had ever done anything like this before. So it fell to that young man, Tom Revellini, to pull it off. Now, Tom's a pretty sharp guy, but he'd never done anything like this before, nor had anybody else. Tom's key to success? Something that a term Daniel Goleman coined, which you've, I'm sure, heard. Emotional intelligence, EQ. In the case of Tom, what that meant was drive, energy, perseverance, his ability to pick himself up and his team pick them up after a failure. And there were multiple failures in the development and test of the airbag system. Tom was just brilliant at doing that. And when I'm hiring people today, when I'm looking for talent, I look for talent, I look for people that have skills and a great resume, but I really look for that EQ quality. When I look them in the eye, I want to see that drive, I want to see passion, I want to see some real energy. That's what I hire for these days. This is a test that we're able to do in Earth atmosphere. This is a parachute test. You see our parachute coming down, there's the back shell and the lander. That whole span there is about 30 meters. This was a key part of what we did to validate everything we could about entry, descent, and landing. We did a lot of testing. And that really was our mantra. It wasn't take risks, don't fail. It wasn't faster, better, cheaper. It was test, test, test. And that's really fundamental to any innovation where you're trying to do something basically new. You've got to prove it out, and you've got to prove it out under the most severe conditions you can come up with. Now, when it comes to severe conditions, there's a whole other world. What we talk about is unknown unknowns, things that you don't know about that could kill you. Well, the way we designed the Pathfinder system and the missions that have followed, we started out with the entry, descent, and landing architecture, and we basically depended on that parachute to slow us down enough that when we got to the surface, that the airbag would survive. And again, wanted to get that airbag coming down at less than 100 kilometers an hour. One of our engineers, one of my favorite engineers, thought about this problem a little bit. And he said, what happens if the parachute doesn't work as well as we think it's going to or it needs to? What if that airbag system, what if the lander gets heavier? All of a sudden, we're going to find ourselves into a situation we can't get out of. In comes this system. It's called the Rocket Assisted Deceleration, RAD. There was a rocket scientist. I needed some more rockets in this mission. But this system looked very risky on the face of it. We're adding a whole new system that nobody had ever done before. We're going to use solid rockets to decelerate somebody on the surface, in the atmosphere of Mars. This turned out to be absolutely essential to our success. This system really defined for me robustness. Robustness is the capability of your system, of your technology, of whatever you're trying to implement, defines that its ability to deal with the unknown unknowns. Now, I'd like to take you to the surface of Mars and give you a Martian eye view of what it will be like to accomplish entry, descent, and landing per the Mars Science Laboratory. Now this is a animation, so you'll get a chance to see it as if you were there at Mars. For us here on Earth, it will have already happened. We're now entering the atmosphere. We're going at about 6 kilometers a second. We're starting to adjust our attitude so we get a precise landing. This is the heating phase. Much hotter than heating even at Earth, because we're going so fast. Now we've slowed down enough that we can deploy the parachute, but we're still traveling twice the speed of sound. Here comes the parachute. Twice the speed of sound. Now we start decelerating. We're below the speed of sound. Now we're about 7/10 the speed of sound. Now we release the lander. This is a new propulsion system that we've added because the airbag system couldn't carry a rover as big as Curiosity. This is what we call the sky crane. You'll see the sky crane start to work now. We've slowed down to a few centimeters a second. We've lowered the rover down, and now we're going to gently land the rover on the surface of Mars. This is all under autonomous control by the rover. Touchdown. Now we cut the rover free. The descent stage flies away and crashes. Everybody ready to go to Mars still? This is Curiosity as she starts her roving mission at Gale Crater. Something that we're all looking forward to, and you'll get a chance to hear about it, see it on August 5th. Lands at 10:30 at night, California time, on Sunday, August 5th. So after that, what that really showed, for me anyway, is showed the synthesis and the combination of all the innovations that we had put together into a fully functional system. And again, the only place we can ever test that system is at Mars. Now, of course, when you're doing this kind of work, there are going to be problems. And we had a lot of challenges, a lot of problems on Pathfinder and Spirit and Opportunity, and a lot on Curiosity, much more than we'd ever expected. But here we have an example of a situation in which we're at the Kennedy Space Center. We're getting ready to get up on the Delta rocket, and here's a problem. A problem something we had done a dozen times, and all of a sudden it wasn't working. We were not able to close up the lander pedals. And at that point, something about our culture kicked in. And we had developed a culture of rapid decision making. And so I'm part of one of the groups there. We're looking at the situation. And I was able to get just a few engineers and a couple of the key managers together. We could sit down, talk about what we're seeing, diagnose the problem, come up with a plan, and get on the phone back to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and tell people what we needed done and get that work to get it done. So in a matter of a few days, something that looked like it was going to cost us the whole mission, we were able to resolve. That kind of fast decision-making process is a hallmark of successful companies. Communication. These are antennas that we're able to talk to our spacecraft 24/7, 365. Anywhere in the solar system, we have antennas that can communicate with our spacecraft. This set happens to be in Canberra, Australia. It's another set in California, and a third set in Madrid, Spain. I talked a little bit about the importance of communication, but we lost a spacecraft, a multi-million-dollar spacecraft, because of a communication breakdown. The Mars Climate Orbiter was on its way to Mars. It came right after Mars Pathfinder, and we lost it. It burned up in the atmosphere. The reason that the media was given, and the media picked up on, I should say, was that there was a unit conversion error. There'd been a mistake converting from English units to metric units. We work in metric units. And it doesn't get any more embarrassing than that for a rocket scientist. But the real cause, the root cause, in my view, was a communication breakdown. Because the navigator that was flying this mission, that knew where the spacecraft was and where it was going, could see it's not flying the trajectory he was predicting. He tried to communicate to his management. He tried to get people to recognize he had a problem here. He did not do that effectively. And so when this spacecraft got to Mars, it ended up going into the atmosphere and burning up. For the lack of clear communication, of effective communication, we lost that mission. Otherwise, it would be in orbit around Mars today. The power of communication cannot be undervalued. This is a very special group of women. These are the 7 dwarfs. Of course, you guys have, you see Doc in the middle, there's Dopey and Sleepy. And of course, you realize there's only 6 of them here. Well, who's the 7th dwarf that didn't want her picture taken? Well, that would be Grumpy. And what is Grumpy's job? Well, Grumpy's quality control, of course. But this group of ladies represents for me, I learned something from this group of women, and I learned something about teams, about people. And what they taught me was that there's really 3 elements that you need to look for in a team. You need to look for talent, you need to look for ownership, and you need to look for trust. You need to actually establish all 3 of those. We know what talent looks like. We know how to hire it. We know how to train it. These are a very, very talented group of women. Ownership is the next thing that's key. Ownership, personal ownership of the quality of the work you're doing. That's pretty obvious. That's fundamental to what we do in the aerospace industry. There's another aspect of ownership. It's ownership of the job, of saying, is this the right job? Am I doing the job that needs to be done? And that requires people to think not just as specialists, but as systems people. Think about their role in the grander system. And that's an important thing for leadership to inspire and to sponsor. The third element is trust. Teams need to trust each other. They need to trust the members of the team. They need to trust their boss. They need to be able to bring the boss bad news. And these fine ladies brought me a lot of bad news because they have one of the toughest jobs in the aerospace industry. Their job is to build the cabling, the wiring that interconnects all of our electronics. It's the first thing we need delivered, it's the last thing we define, and it absolutely has to be perfect. The other aspect of trust is me trusting them. If there was somebody on the Pathfinder team I didn't trust, they didn't last very long. There's a great book out right now. I urge you to take a look at it, read it, called Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey's son. And what he talks about, and it's something I know you all recognize, think about situations, relationships with somebody that you trust. Think about how easy it is to communicate, how quickly you can make decisions, how cost-effective it is to do business with a person like that or a company like that. Now think of the opposite. Think about situations where you don't trust somebody. Think of how difficult the communication is, how slow things happen, how expensive it can be to do business with people you don't trust. Trust is something that really is fundamental to us as leaders, to being able to create in the work environment and in our relationships with people we do business with. This is another really important team. This is the people that were responsible for the assembly of the Pathfinder spacecraft. This is a very complicated machine. It's like the Russian dolls. It's a doll inside a doll inside of a doll. And we had never done that before. This is a great group of people that actually represent the kind of diverse community of talent that we needed to do this job. People with many, many years' experience, people who were pretty much new at it. People, men, women, people with very different technical and backgrounds and personalities. The one thing, though, I learned from this, as I, again, reflected on my role as a leader, I'm back there in the upper right, was glue and grease. These are qualities that leadership needs to bring to bear. Well, glue and grease are things that don't defeat each other. Well, that's part of the nature of leadership. But part of our job is to figure out clever ways to solve problems. And glue is about holding a team together, keeping them focused, keeping them moving in the right direction. And grease is about facilitating how the job gets done, cutting through the red tape, enabling them to be more effective in their jobs. Glue and grease is fundamental to the qualities of leadership. So, after all this technology development, all this testing, all the work that's gone into it, for me and for you, it's time to take your product to the marketplace. For me, it's launch day. It's showtime. Now, I thought we should have got credit for mission success at this point because we were on budget and on schedule, something a lot of people didn't think would happen. But of course, we had a lot of work ahead of us. Here's Mars, our target, where we're all going on this journey. The Pathfinder landing site was over in the mid-latitude, about to the right there. We picked a landing site. This was very carefully done. We wanted to pick a place that was scientifically interesting, but not too risky. So we picked an area called Ares Vallis, where a huge volume of water had once flowed. And we thought there would be some great science available in that ellipse, which was 200 by 100 kilometers. It's a big ellipse. Well, through all the work of our navigators and through the quality of the product of the spacecraft and the landing team, we missed that center of that ellipse by only 20 kilometers. One of the navigators went back and said, well, let's see, that's like a hole-in-one from LA to Houston. That's pretty damn good shooting. So, what did we find? In my dreams, I find Marvin the Martian waiting for us on the surface of Mars. Because that's what we're about in this program. We're about answering a fundamental human question. Are we alone? And part of the way we've done that is Mars is a wonderful laboratory for trying to answer that question. Because anywhere on Earth you find liquid water, you find life. So our strategy has been follow the water. Where's there been liquid water on Mars? Has there been liquid water on Mars? And so that's what we set out to do. And in fact, that's what we've shown. That's what we've proven. This is what we actually saw on the first day, on the morning of July 4th, 1997. This was a panorama of our landing site with Sojourner on her pedal. And we looked at this and said, my gosh, what an amazing place we've landed in. This picture was what we called our mission success panorama. Our thought was, if we could just get a picture like this down on the landing day to the surface of Earth and maybe get it picked up on the New York Times, our mission would be declared a success. Well, this picture was on the front page of pretty much every newspaper and magazine on the planet. What that meant to me was this was a recognition of a human accomplishment. Not NASA or JPL, but a human accomplishment. People really appreciated what we'd done in accomplishing this mission. Now, at the end of the day, on the 4th of July, things had gone much better than any of us had any reason to expect. But I looked over at the rover team, and they were looking kind of concerned. I went over and asked them what's going on and said, we've lost communication with Sojourner. Well, what do you do when your cell phone's not working? Well, you hit the reset button. Well, we tried that, and it didn't work. So that night, as we went home, we had 2 bottles of champagne in the refrigerator, a Dom Perignon and a California champagne. We had the California champagne that night because I didn't know whether the mission would be successful, really seen as successful without Sojourner. Well, the next day, as the Earth rises over Mars and we were able to reestablish communication, Sojourner was back online. We didn't know at that time what had happened. We figured it out a little later. So we scrambled. We scrambled to get Sojourner stood up on her pedal, get her ramps out, get her down on the surface of Mars. So just at the end of the day, on the 5th of July, as again, Earth is setting over Mars and our communication is about to die, we got this picture. Sojourner was down on the surface of Mars, 6 wheels down, and for us, for the engineers and the managers who worked this project, this was our moment. This was success. So, what else have we learned about Mars? Again, Mars continues to teach me as a manager about risk. Look at the place we landed with Pathfinder. You look at the next 2 panoramas are Spirit and Opportunity. Pathfinder was about taking risk. Well, remember I told you about that climate orbiter failure? Well, we lost another one in that same sequence of missions. We lost 2 missions in a single opportunity. The risk pendulum went from, yeah, we love risk, to no, we don't. And at that point, we changed the mission to land at much safer places, and that's where we went. So Spirit and Opportunity landed very safely. The airbag system did just exactly what we needed. But again, it was a major paradigm shift that we're still living with. And part of what I'm doing today is trying to reinvigorate this faster, better, cheaper way of thinking so that we can get back and, again, change the culture back toward a greater risk tolerance. Here's a picture from Spirit which shows absolute proof that liquid water has been on Mars and been on there for a long enough time to create a sedimentary rock. So the key, again, is finding places where there's been a lot of water for a long period of time. If we can find places like that, and we think we have, and we're sending Curiosity there, that we may find evidence of some form of very primitive chemistry, biochemistry, that could be precursors to life or maybe even evidence of past life. That's our current Holy Grail. Mars is an interesting place to explore. This is a big planet. The surface area of Mars is as big as the surface area, dry area of all the Earth. Lots of interesting places to go. And between these 2 shots, 6 years apart, we see evidence of some process, something going on Mars we didn't expect. What has caused that? Is there water? Is it an active water scene? We don't know. This is one of my favorite places. This was taken by the European Mars Express. When I was working on the human side, I was saying, this is where I'd like to send astronauts. This would be a wonderfully exciting place to explore. This is the Grand Canyon of Mars. It's 5,000 kilometers long. It's 10 kilometers deep. And the history of Mars is written in the walls of Valles Marineris. This is a picture from Opportunity as she wakes up. She's waking up in the morning after hibernating over the winter. And you can see the dust on her solar arrays, and you can see her shadow looking back at us, letting us know she's ready to start her mission. So I'd like to finish our journey to Mars with, again, a picture from Opportunity looking out over the surface of Mars in a beautiful spring morning in Mars. So I'd like you now to reflect, think back of all the ideas, the discussion we've had about innovation and the importance of people in creating and producing spectacular success. So when you go back to your offices, I want every one of you to think about, take risk, but do not fail. Thank you very much.